It's time for yet another podcast. We've been calling these Yap versus Yap. Even when people really agree with each other, which I think in this case we will more than other. I'm pleased to be joined by Nate Richard. Of course, you know him, a contributor to the Film Yap, also with Collider. Nate, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here. Excited to talk a little Barbie as well. I got my Ken rep.
Yes, I
So
love it. I love it. Our topic today is a little bit touchy, but something you and I've been thinking about, and you and I got to talking about. And we said, hey, we should turn this into a podcast. And that is, I guess I'm calling it like the politicalization of pop culture. Obviously, we're going to focus more on movies, but I mean, I think it's more of a symptom rather than a disease of our times. You know, the disease of our time being what I call tribalism, where people are connected to their tribes through their culture, through their region, through their political party, and they tend to see everything in that prism. I mean, it used to be just politics was in that prism, but then it became sports and movies and songs and pop culture, to the point where I think people, like, in a lot of cases, are unable to break out of that mold and take movies. My thing with my philosophy for movies and art is the same one that I have for people, which is I take people as they come, which is you judge them based on the person you meet and interact with, rather than they are X, they are this race, this gender, this sexuality, this religion. To me, it's about the individual and not about the tribe. So we've been seeing this a lot with movies, especially of late. The one I know we really wanted to talk about that kind of spurred this conversation was Barbie, which, of course, it just seemed like everybody just, with these movies, people just, stick with their tribe, and like whatever their tribe is doing, they just go that way. So it seems like this group of people is reacting badly to this movie, therefore I am too, and vice versa. The big challenge being that people will do this without even having seen the movie. So
yep.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
With Barbie, I don't even think the movie's that political per se. I think it's more just about like humans in general and society in general. And that's what really stood out. I took my mom both times to see it. And one of the things I was telling her is the movie, even, it's obviously geared towards a female audience, but I think a lot of it also spoke to me as well, because how it addresses masculinity. And I think there's a lot of like pundits out there who aren't even that masculine, who get like very offended, I guess, by the messages in Barbie. Like, I was having dinner with my friends a couple weeks back, and they were like, "Oh, I heard it's woke," and I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Listen, do you guys find me that masculine?" They're like, "None of us are," and I'm like, "That's what it's saying. That's more of the point of it." And I there's some of it that I think relates back to TikTok. A lot of it, I think, there's a thing with my generation where a lot of people will kind of just take things almost literally, or they won't even, pay attention to movies. They see things just in a way that's just black and white. There's no gray area. And I've even had an issue, before with seeing that. But I think I'm able to see the gray area with media consumption. I've even seen it with Oppenheimer as well. I keep seeing movies in my feed talking about how it's imperialist propaganda, and I'm like, did you guys like watch the movie at all? And I think it really does a good job of like addressing, how much of like a mulligan this, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was. It's not just rah rah Americana. It's honestly the exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I think Oppenheimer, it's really, his story. It's Oppenheimer's
Mm-hmm.
story. How that journey was experienced through his eyes, obviously to some extent the people that surrounding him. It's not a movie that's a parable about, nuclear weapons, or was it right or wrong to bomb Japan. And I mean, that is there, but and I think in some things, I've read some things from a Japanese perspective that they actually say that's what bothered us, is that it really doesn't touch upon the impacts of what he did, rather than just his own journey of becoming this destroyer of worlds, as he labeled himself. And I was like, well, I mean, that's the movie they made. I often reference, I think I did it in one of my reviews just this past week, is the late great Gene Siskel. He had what I call Siskel's first rule of film criticism, which is, review the movie they made, not the movie you wish they had made.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do that with these films in particular. And I think you're very right. The woke thing, it's this whole, it almost like it's become the latest iteration of our tribalism, is this whole woke and anti-woke, and which tribe do you fall in? And I think the truth is that most people, I would say like 80% of people, are like, I don't care about any of that BS.
Yeah.
I'm an independent person. I lean this way, but I think for myself. I vote the way I vote, and I approach movies and pop culture the way I do. But I think so much, as you said, that the media message that just is coming through people on their phones and go and social media, it's all this stuff. It's like, oh, you can't, you go to see movie, it's a woke movie, it's for us, or don't go to see Barbie or Oppenheimer because we're anti-woke and we don't see that. Same thing with the rare film that got quickly labeled and embraced as the anti-woke film of our time now, which is Sound of Freedom. Now, I will say I have not seen Sound of Freedom, although we
I
did
haven't either.
a review of it on the Yap, which Alec Toombs wrote. Go check it out. And he basically just approached it as, this is what the movie is. It's pretty much a straightforward, action thriller with, ominous things about child trafficking and all this kind of stuff. But that's there. And he took the movie as it was. I think he put in his review, he's like, I'm probably like the most liberal person you've ever met, but I had no problems with this movie. And I think he gave it a pretty favorable review. Um, but it quickly got embraced as this. It's an anti-woke film, and it's embracing some of these conspiracy theories. I admit some of which I'm only just vaguely aware of, like adrenochrome or something like this, which is crazy, really loopy stuff out there about people stealing, nutrients from children and pumping it into rich old people's bodies to make them young. Uh, Sounds like Sterling Hayden's own thing about the essential essences or whatever that was from Doctor Strangelove. Now, it's true that the star of that film, Jim Caviezel, and I think one of the producers, traffic in some of that malarkey.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable calling it malarkey just because it's not something that, to me, I agree with or disagree with.
Yeah.
Is there's no evidence for it. And so, the truth is, this movie was shot 5 years ago, and I think it was 20th Century Fox. Then that got
Yeah.
bought by Disney. Disney shelved it because they just didn't know what to do with it. And then eventually, a distributor that is mostly done faith-based films picked it up, distributed it, and I think it's made like $300 million now.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want about Disney's decision, about why they shelved it. I'm sure they'd love to have the $300 million now. But I think what happened was everybody sort of, started at, they started with their priors, as people say, their biases, like their home base, and they just started with that with this movie and jumped off. So Caviezel and this other guy, because they dabble in that stuff, they said, oh, we can do this to go around and have some talks and talk about this thing that we care about. And of course, then immediately other people. So you got like, the Ben Shapiro's of the world and everybody embracing the movie. And that becomes the signal to everybody else on the opposite side to say, well, I've got to say bad things about it and not go see it and blah, blah, blah. And again, I saw once that movie started blowing up and making tons of money, I started seeing so much stuff from the media about all this crazy, the stuff that's being passed off by Caviezel and them. I think that's not in the movie. None of that is in the movie. And it's like, but the thing is, that's the way people are, is because people I don't like are espousing this movie, I have to find ways to be against it.
Yeah. And I read Alex's review, and that was a very great write-up, and it very much reminded me of there's a guy, he used to be with Collider, and he does an independent podcast now named Jeff Snyder. And he's also very, liberal leaning, but he saw the movie and he was like, yeah, it's not a political or faith-based movie at all. It's just kind of a, drama or action drama, something like that. And he's like, I actually thought it was well made. And I think when people look at like, oh, Disney dumped this movie, I'm not gonna, defend Disney. I have my own opinions on them, but at the same time, they were dumping a lot of movies. when
Yeah.
they bought up 20th Century Fox. Like they had those movies that went to like Netflix, like The Fear Street, which was just like a teen slasher movie like trilogy. They dumped like that Amy Adams movie, The Woman in the Window. Well, that movie wasn't like good in the first place, but still they were dumping a lot of different movies. It wasn't just this particular, one. And I think as well, 20th Century Fox, it's always been very separate from the News Corporation. And I really doubt that a movie studio that prolific would put out something with that kind of messaging that some of these
Yeah.
people are claiming it has.
Yeah. So it's almost like you're going to tag it from both ways. I mean, I felt the same way about Barbie. Is I mean, the main thing beyond the woke anti-woke junk is it got attacked as being anti-man. It's like a feminist, screechy feminist man-hating movie, and I'm just like, that's not there at all. I
No.
mean, if anything, it has a lot of very interesting things to say about masculinity. I would argue there's also some interesting sort of, questioning some of the aspects of, today's version of feminism, third wave or fourth wave
Yeah.
feminism, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's an interesting movie that to me finds its own way. So it's interesting that it's been embraced and reviled in less equal measure. Like 1.4 billion gross on that. Definitely less
Yeah.
equal measures reviled than loved. But yeah, that's what bothers me is people not seeing the movies, harping into what their tribe is saying about it, and then their
Yeah.
behavior, and that's how the movie becomes situated within pop culture rather than what it actually is as a work of art.
Yeah, and I think people forget too because they're like, "Oh, it's so anti-man." And I mean, Greta Gerwig, she directed it, but she also co-wrote the movie with her husband Noah Baumbach. And I think you can sense that there was, two different people writing that script, from their own perspective. I didn't think it was just biased, one-sided, or propaganda or whatever some of these, pundits are calling it. I just thought it's a satire. I remember like Bill Maher just recently was like going off about it,
Yeah,
about how they represented Mattel in an inaccurate way. He's like, "Oh, there is women who work there," but I'm like, it's a satire.
yeah,
I mean, I know I'm the only critic in this area who liked the movie Don't Look Up, but that was a satire. And I look at like Meryl Streep's, president character. That was a combination of what I viewed was, Trump and Hillary from like 2016. It wasn't just one particular political party. And I mean, when that movie came out, and even when it was filmed, that wasn't our president at the time. It's a satire.
yeah.
And I think Barbie, even the real world, it's set in a very heightened kind of reality.
Yeah, and this is not a recent phenomenon. I mean, it's become more fever pitch, I think, in the last few months. But I mean, just looking back to the near past or going a little bit further, right before COVID, the very last film I saw in theaters before COVID hit was The Hunt.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that film.
Yeah.
It was espoused as a movie in which liberals hunt conservatives like to the death kind of thing. And I went to see it, and it's very much a more subtle film than that. It really takes a lot of pokes at all sides of things. If anything, it aims more arrows at the quote unquote left side of thing than the right
Yeah.
side of thing. And to me, it was an interesting movie. It wasn't a great movie, but like Betty Gilpin gave a really interesting,
Yeah.
different performance that you just don't see in that sort of movie. So again, the movie then got lost in COVID and kind of forgotten. But more recently, just this spring, we had Elemental and Little Mermaid, two other Disney products, one animated, one not, that very much got attacked into the woke versus anti-woke. Little Mermaid, other than the fact that they cast a black actress as a Little Mermaid, to me, other than that, it's pretty much just a straight redo of the animated film. Ended up doing very well financially. I think it's approaching like $600 million gross
Yeah.
worldwide.
And she was the
Ele-
best part of that movie, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Oh, she's fantastic. Her singing and everything. And then Elemental very much did not do very well. I think it's one of the lowest grossing Disney Pixar animated films, which I could definitely see that. I saw some elements in it. It's more of a parable about immigration and assimilating into existing popular cultures. But again, people just sort of go right there rather than taking the movie the way it for what it is.
Mhm. And I think we've seen that a lot because I know we said we were going to bring it up. What's the Snow White remake? So
That's
I've always,
just as we're talking about that, that is all hot, hot, hot on social media right now.
and I look at that, and I've always been a defender of Rachel Ziegler because I thought she was phenomenal in West Side Story. I've always
I
been a
thought
fan of her.
I thought she should have gotten an Oscar nomination for West Side Story. She was amazing.
I agree. And I didn't hate Shazam too. I thought she was one of the better parts of that movie for, kind of smaller role in that. And I've always even enjoyed her on social media. But I think some of those comments that she's been making about Snow White, most of the time I would be like, yeah, whatever, people are overreacting. But it does, I get the sense where it is coming off a little, condescending with how much they're, changing in that movie. Where it's
Yeah,
like, is this just Disney almost becoming like a parody of
yeah,
themselves? Is this what that one side thought the Little Mermaid was, but clearly was not?
yeah. And again, people are upset about like non-white people being cast in what traditionally were a white role. And then you get into like replacement theory and really loopy garbage. But I mean, I can see, when it seems like it's happening over and over again. It's like, okay, we got a black actress as Little Mermaid, we've got a Latina as Snow White. It almost seems like you're doing it just to do it, rather than because she's a fantastic, actress and singer and everything else. I don't know. I mean, the name of the character. I mean, Snow White. The name was supposed to indicate that she was pure of heart. It was not Snow Caucasian.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I've gone back and forth. I think people are. I mean, I watched the clips of Ziegler's interviews, and she's basically just saying, "Hey, we're making a completely different movie. We're not trying to be, part of a film from 80 years ago almost." Um, she gets a little like, the Prince. We don't even really need him in the movie, which is true. But
Yeah.
some of the stuff was a little hard angled. I will admit. I did go back, like now people are pulling up some of her social media tweets and stuff from the last few years. I gotta admit it, some of it is pretty condescending is the word used. I think that's a pretty good way to put it. But I mean, I've always been very good at separating the artist from the art. I'm still a big fan of her work that I've seen so far. Fantastic West Side Story. I'm interested to see what they'll do in Snow White. Um,
Mm.
but
And she's in the Hunger Games, the prequel, which I've heard that it's actually quite good. So like my fear though is I feel like some of this politicalization of these kinds of movies, like, is this going to have an effect also on her, career wise? Because the West Side Story, nominated for a lot of Oscars, I love that movie. Did not do well financially.
no, I'm surprised at that.
Shazam
Yeah,
2 flopped. I think The Hunger Games is maybe a safe bet, but it's also opening right in between Dune 2 and the Marvels. And then Snow White, I feel like whether or not it's warranted, I don't really think it's that warranted. People are, turning against Disney because I truly thought The Little Mermaid would make $1 billion. Like,
yeah,
because Aladdin did, and so did, The Lion King. And I thought The Little Mermaid was much better than most of their, live action remakes. But the
yeah.
fact that it didn't make $1 billion, it still made them a profit a little bit, but I was kind of shocked that it didn't, reach that point. I thought that was going to be the biggest movie of the summer. And when I look at Snow White, when we don't even have a trailer and people are already talking about it and getting mad about it, I'm like, that Disney can't be happy with that right now.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just a sickened thing. I mean, even though, I saw some of the things Ziegler said about the movie and some of her social media behavior in past years, yeah, it's a little, turns me off a little bit. It doesn't change my opinion of her about her as an actress. It
Yeah.
doesn't change my opinion about the movie. I will see the movie and judge the movie for what it is, not this thing where it's just like people are just scattering into their priors, sticking with their tribe, whatever their tribe is saying. I've got to amplify and repeat that again before I've seen the movie, or even vowing, I will not go see the movie. I think maybe why some of this stuff has reached a fever pitch this year, like this last 6, 7, 8 months, is I think we've seen quote people from the right side finding some success with blockading or boycotting stuff.
Yeah.
With Disney and Bud Light and some other things, and they're now happy about being able to flex those muscles. So I think that's maybe why it's become a little bit more. Not to say that people on the left haven't done it very well themselves for a long time. It's just that now that they're embracing that role that maybe they felt like that a weapon that was used against them has now been put in their hands, if you will.
Yeah. And I think because before, like I look back at like when La La Land came out or like Three Billboards came out, there was a lot from like the other end being like, oh, this movie's problematic because this, and this. I'm like, stop politicizing these movies. Like La La Land, I'm like, that's not a political movie. But now it's the other side. It's like it's completely shifted where it's like, oh, this is why Barbie, you shouldn't see it because it's against this, this, and this. And I'm like, oh my God. Like I just look at a movie, like you were saying, I judge a movie for what it is. I don't have to always, agree with everything being said, but in fact, I did agree with a lot of what Barbie, was saying and a lot of its messages. But I think it's just gotten to an extreme now where, now that like the conservative base has, the sound of freedom and everything, it's like they're kind of almost like playing like a tug of war. And I'm like, oh my God. Like even with music now,
Yeah.
as we were just talking about, that Richmond of Richmond.
Richmond, north of Richmond, is a
Yeah.
yeah. This is just within the last week. This is like literally a farmer out in Virginia, South Carolina. I'm sorry, I don't have his name at my fingertips. Who literally he just with his guitar records songs out in his farm, puts them on YouTube. Nobody pays any attention to him. Um, and for whatever reason, just within the last 10 days or so, this song has blown up. I looked at it last night. It was up to like 26 million views. And it's basically just a very, what I would call blue collar song about can't find good jobs, can't good pay. All the rich men are just conspiring to keep all the money and the power for themselves, and people like you and me don't have any of it. And that's basically it. And the guy, I really should have looked up his name, has said like, I'm not left, I'm not right, but this is my story, and I think it's the story of a lot of people. Oliver Anthony is his name, and I don't know if you've seen it. To me, it's an
Yeah.
objectively terrific song. He's got
Mm.
this great, like very sort of like mournful country music wail, very old fashioned, like 1930s, 1940s style of singing. And there's nothing. I mean, there's some politically adjacent stuff in the lyrics, but it's basically just it's what I would call a protest song. It's like a rural bluegrass blue collar protest song. But of course, people are doing with the song just like they've been doing with the movies and TV shows and everything else. Is they're just basing everything on their priors.
Yeah. And like I listened to the song and like I agree. He has a great like voice and everything. And I think people are like taking the song like word for word, like taking it too literal. Like I think the song is far less political than I never really heard that Jason Aldean song. I just read like some of the lyrics. I was like,
I've heard about it. I have not had interest in
yeah.
experience.
I was not really a fan of that singer in general, but with this one, like I feel like he's almost in an ironic kind of twist talking about the politicalization of everything, and they're forgetting about working class people instead of just
I think
QAnon
people,
conspiracy, whatever.
yeah, but of course, what is happening with that? What happened with the Jim Caviezel song, which is that the right people or the wrong people are embracing it. So therefore, we have to run this way. They're going this way, so we have to run this way. With Sound of Freedom, yeah, is there just it's more or less being embraced on the right side of things. I mean, you can judge that basically on like who in the media sphere is talking about it and championing it. So if like like the Matt Walshes of the world are doing their own YouTube videos talking about how great this other video is, that's going to immediately turn a lot of people on and immediately turn a lot of people off, and they know it. I mean, I like to say about, a lot of things. I mean, a lot of this politicization started, I think, with like cable news.
Yeah.
25 years ago, it just became this very direct thing of we're going to segment, like this is our audience, so you can have this audience, and people are doing this deliberately because in any kind of a conversation, whether it's about art, politics, or where they intersect, there are people that are genuinely interested in adding to the conversation, and there are people that their goal is to just siphon as much attention and the ability to make money from the debate as possible. And that's what a lot of these things are about. The Matt Walshes and people like this, they know if they talk about something that it will draw ears and eyeballs to them, and garner them attention, and elevate their ability to have power and influence. And I think that's what a lot of this politicalization, I'm glad I'm not the only one stumbling with that word, is about. It's about power and influence. And unfortunately, movies, pop culture, songs, art have kind of just become like the tools at hand to, land those blows on people you don't like, rather than again just, appreciating them as the artifacts that they are.
Yeah, and I just lost track of what I was about. I think also a lot of it, not just like the Daily Wire people or whatever. I think a lot of it is also TikTok. There is even just something in like the New York Times, which I know that kind of even factors into a lot of what we're discussing as well. But there's something about like some of these like influencers and how much money they're making about just like talking about these movies or being like, oh, this is the movie for the people or things like that. And it's like, I think that's what's, really provoking. I think the younger generation, people like my age as well, because they hear about, oh, this TikToker says this movie is just woke propaganda. And you see a lot of that even on like YouTube channels. Like a lot of the YouTubers that I used to watch, like when I was in, high school or middle school to watch their reviews, a lot of them kind of have just shifted away from YouTube or found other like avenues. But now there's been this new rise of people, and I won't like name them just because they do have fan bases and everything, but their whole shtick is saying this movie hates men, this movie hates white people, this. Go watch this movie instead, blah blah blah. And it's like, oh my god. And like I even have friends who I will disagree with a lot politically, but they used to watch those channels all the time. But then I was like, hey, you know me, I do this for a living. And they can start to see it's like, oh, wait, it is all just a shtick. That's how they make money, is just by politicizing every single movie that comes out.
Yep. Well, on that note, please take our advice. Don't follow the shtick. Don't fall for the shtick. Just be you and go see movies and take joy in them, like them or dislike them, but do it from inside your own heart and your own mind. Don't worry about if you're in a tribe, what your tribe says, or even your friends and family and colleagues say. You know, to really love movies is, to me, going to the movie theaters and like that. It's a group experience, but the real joy of it, the love affair, is between you and the movie. So don't let anything come between you and what you love or don't love.
Yeah.
All right, Nate, thanks for joining me. If you could quick tell everyone where people can find you on social media, websites, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, or I guess now X or whatever it will be called, at Nate Knows Movies. And you could also find my words at the Film Yap or at Collider, where I have a couple of reviews that have just come out this week for Strays. I have the new season of Solar Opposites. I reviewed that as well. And coming up, be having some reviews for Equalizer 3 and Vacation Friends 2. And I'll also be at the Toronto International Film Festival next month. So you'll be hearing a lot from me about a lot of my takes on this year's, big Oscar movies. So
Outstanding. That's terrific. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. See you.
bye.